There's a plugin that you will see posted all of the time in the final rundown of the best free plugins of any year, and it's the Tokyo Records Nova. I have seen way too many people talk about it and not talk about it in depth. So I will talk of many of the features that I don't see talked about and why it could be a really reliable EQ for your toolbox. Straight from Mexico City, my name is Juanchis, and let's learn about the Tokyo Records EQ Nova. Please remember that this is the free version, and if you want more features and you want to support the developers, you can buy the full version. It has a couple more bands, and it offers a whole section of smart operation. I'm not going to talk about it right now because this is a video on the free version of it. Be sure to check it out. I don't think it's expensive, so go ahead and look it up. I have this session that I used for a previous video. I probably won't show fully mixed versions because I'm not trying to show anything off. I'm trying to show what the plugins do with nothing on the session. So this is like the microphones only and a couple of things processing just to spice things a little bit up, because some of the things that were recorded as they were recorded, I really don't like them so much. That's what's different. So this plugin in its cleanest form is nothing more than an EQ, a 4-band EQ with a high pass and a low pass filter. But if you click on the bottom of the black screen or the gray section, you will be working with the wideband. You have a gain for the wideband, that's up and down, and you can handle it from this section here in the window. You can move any of the bands around, and there's a really nice feature where sometimes your bands are disorganized and the one is on the right of the second one, and you can just hit this button, order by frequency, and it fixes that for you. And I think that's something really silly but really much appreciated. You can use this only as an EQ to manage tonal balance or fix or fit or feature anything within your mix. Always remember that you can use the scroll within your mouse to handle the Q most of the times on almost any plugin, on any equalizer plugin. You can use the scroll to handle the width of the band as you're moving it around. That also works for the high pass. It handles the slope of the high pass. Unlucky for me, the Magic Mouse is really not so precise and it's way too sensitive for my taste. I'm much more of a wheelie kind of guy for that kind of work. But yeah, it's nothing more than an EQ. One really nice feature that not many people talk about, and then Worral and White Sea Studios were a couple of the people that really brought this into my mindset when working with digital EQs, is how we cramp up or avoid cramping up frequencies, and the EQ naturally goes all the way up to 40 kilohertz. That's a great sign of a great design of an EQ. A couple of shortcuts that could help you out work better with it. If you hold the control key, you can switch the type of band that you're working with, as a high shelf, as a peak, or a low shelf. Another shortcut is if you hit Shift and Command at the same time while moving a band, you enter the band solo mode. This is of course really useful when you're trying to fine-tune something that you're listening as a resonance for microphones or something like that. And that's like the main use, or a very simple use of this plugin, an EQ. There's a really unique function that this EQ has that's not available on every single EQ. That's the EQ gain. Let me make a really dramatic EQ on the whole drum bass. So you probably have seen or heard about the isophonic curves or the Fletcher and Monson subject, where we're talking about equal loudness. And what this means is that we don't perceive all of the frequencies at the same volume, because volume implies that someone is listening no matter what their amplitude, their level is. So this EQ affects the way we perceive because it changes the gain of certain frequencies. If you listen to this equalization of the drums with the EQ gain button on, you will listen to a compensation of the equal loudness curves. Let me show you. And when I turn it off, Maybe it's not so obvious. Let me flip it around. Let me push some frequencies that we are so much more sensitive to. As you can see, when I have this button turned off, we actually listen to it a lot louder because it's not trying to compensate that effect. This could be a strange way of thinking of EQs, but what it can do to help your workflow if you are messing with it and you're not even noticing it, is that you don't have to mess around so much with the fader. Because usually when you're making some equalization, you want to move the fader and the knob up the gain at the same time, so you're manually compensating that gain. And that's something that we don't usually get when we're working in the digital realm, because we only have one mouse and we can only move one knob at the same time, unless you have a mixing surface with knobs or faders. Otherwise, you cannot do that. That's a common practice in the analog world. Most basic thing of how to work it as an EQ. Let me start talking about the dynamic processing that you can do. I told you that when you select the background of the plugin, you can access the wideband. You can use this plugin as a compressor, mainly as a VCA compressor, that it probably won't have a lot of style to it, a lot of attitude to it, but it does work as a compressor. You can change the ratio, you can change the time parameters. And you will see that this blue line shows up in the back, and it's the threshold of the compressor. If you're trying to train your ears, I suggest that you turn the analyzer off so you can start trying to figure out when the compressor is hitting instead of watching it. Because if you have the source input, you can actually see what's the highest thing hitting, and then you can set the compressor to it. And this really modifies the way we are interacting with the plugin. Once you have your compression setting as whatever you like, that's a whole compressor. That's a full band compressor. That works great, but you can use it as a dynamic EQ. That's one of the things that people on the internet praise the most about this plugin. That's the most basic way of working with it as an equalizer. But you can use it as a dynamic EQ. That's one of the things that people on the internet praise the most about this plugin. So you can select any of the bands, for example band 2, and you can select this threshold and turn it into a compressor. You will see the blue line showing up as a threshold. You can deactivate the wideband as a compressor if you want, and you can use this only for compressing. You can set up a new ratio, new timings for it. But what if the timing of this band, you would like it to be the same one as the wideband? So the whole plugin compresses with the same timing, because something to always keep in mind is that the time parameters of a compressor are the most important thing of a compressor, according to my understanding, because that's the way the compressor will pump or will make the mix breathe in many dimensions. If you can pick some wideband parameters that actually work, maybe you want this section to act according to the wideband. You will have to click this wideband button and it will change immediately to the wideband parameters. If I turn it off, it goes back to its own parameters. So that's interesting because you can have the reduction working with the wideband, or you can use it like a split dynamic EQ, so it only reacts to certain resonance that's bleeding in from another microphone or something. If you also need to move all of the bands together, you can select and drag and pull them all the way up, all the way down, left, right, or whatever direction that you may need. There's a knob right here in the bottom that I want to talk about, because I'm pretty sure that many people don't understand what this is doing. I highly suggest that you always look at the user guide or the manual, whatever you call it, because this dry mix isn't a parallel copy of the dry signal. At the 100%, it's 100 dry, and at 0% is 100 wet. And one last secret of the dynamic bands is that if you're using, for example, this band as an expansion instead of compression, because you can drag the ratio all the way to the left, and then for every 0.5 decibels that go above the threshold, it will give you 1 full decibel. For example, to give a lot more excitement and to actually bring the volume up of something that's buried within the mix. For example, to exaggerate that open hat. And there are many things that you can do combining compression, full wideband compression, with dynamic EQ and single band expansion as well. Not only that, you can even protect one part of the spectrum of the frequency range to not being affected by the dynamic characteristics of the plugin. If you hold Option on your keyboard and click the threshold button, now you will see something that's not been talked about enough on the internet about this plugin. It turns this band into a sticky band. Sticky band means that this won't be affected in its range given by its Q by the dynamic processing. I'm going to hyper compress with a wideband, and you will see how even the threshold stays really close to the 0 when you're reaching the band 3. And if I open up the threshold, it won't affect it as much, or I can make it narrower. So let me show you what it happens when it's on and off. So that's a way of protecting the dynamics of a certain part of the range that you're working with. Probably if you're mixing some sort of stereo sum things against a vocal or even a drum loop that you're using because you're using splice and you have a drum loop that you really like, but you want to control certain parts of the spectrum, sticky bands are a great way to do this. And you want to listen to the effects of the compression, you can just listen using the gain reduction delta. Delta, for engineering terms, means only the difference of something, so you will listen to the difference of the gain reduction. Okay, so now it's becoming a really interesting plugin. There is also another fun fact about it, that you have this small map that shows you what band is doing what. If you have this asterisk, I hope I'm saying it correctly. If not, please write it in the comments to show this is a sticky band. The second band has the threshold turned on, so it's a dynamic band, but it has a split time, so it's not following the wideband timings. If I turn the band 1 on with the threshold and for it to listen to the wideband, then you will see that it only shows up with a T because it has the threshold turned on, but it's not split time-wise from the wideband. And there's a lot of information to clump up here. Let's move on to a third video that's going to be really fast and some other nice details that this plugin has. We've been talking a lot about how to work the Tokyo Dome Records Nova EQ as only an EQ, as a wideband compressor, as a dynamic EQ with compression and expansion, how to split the bands to listen, to work with different timings from the wideband, how to make them listen to the wideband, how to work the dry mix, a couple of shortcuts. So let's go to some final detail so you really know Tokyo Dome Records Nova inside out and you can start messing a lot more with it. So one of the things that many people like talking about also is sidechain. So can you do sidechain compression with this? Indeed you can. So let me show you what happens if I turn off this one and I open up this compressor in the bass channel. I can make a send. You know how to make the sends in your own DAW. I'm going to assign this to the 3 and 4 on Reaper because that's where the sidechain goes in, and I can click on this part of the plugin, and instead of having an internal sidechain, I will change it to an external sidechain. It also has an internal sidechain flat. That means that the sidechain route from the Tokyo Dome Records Nova actually is listening to something like this. I think if I remember correctly that it's around 120 Hz, and if you're using the internal sidechain flat, it's going to be something like this, like completely flat. Because low end always gets in the way for compression, because low frequency lasts way too long and we need the timing to be as precise as possible. So we will move this one to external sidechain. The bass will be compressed whenever the drums hit. So remember, whenever the kick hits, it enters into 3 and 4, and that's going to trigger the sidechain compression in the wideband of the bass channel. And it's as easy as that. You can also right-click at the back and you can choose the analyzer to show the sidechain, or you can click it from the right of the plugin. So you can verify very fast if the actual external sidechain is going into the plugin. Another thing you may want to change is the range of the plugin. Maybe you don't want to look at 48 dBs, maybe you need to look 96 dBs for whatever reason. Remember that timing is something that's really important for metering. So you might want to change it from normal to fast or to original. If you're trying to look for transient information, you might want to try fast timing. You might want to look for normal for most of the uses. You can also change the magnitude of the EQ if you want it to give you 12 dB or 24 dB increases. Change the size of the plugin, and this part of the right-click menu is really interesting. For example, you may have some guitars that you're EQing, and you may want to copy this EQ into another guitar and maybe just mess around a little bit with it. So you can copy the state of this one, and if I have another plugin here, I'm going to move into the B section. I can right-click and paste, and now I have every single parameter pasted on another copy of the Nova. This is a really interesting way of working this EQ because you can try match shapes in different ways, and then you can try flipping stuff with a wideband and just mess around with it. It's a really interesting feature. A couple of extra things that aren't so talked about. You can change the quality of the EQ. Remember, please remember that if you're trying it in one single channel, you will probably most likely won't listen to the difference. But if you have a bigger session where it's working in 14, 15 channels and you change the quality to Echo, Precise and Precise Plus, you should be able to listen to some differences. We can't stop talking about how monitoring is important, because if your speakers or your headphones don't translate that information correctly, it doesn't matter, because you won't be able to listen to this. Not because you are not able, because your speakers or your headphones are not translating this information properly. Another thing is that you can change the way or the format the plugin is working. Stereo mono, sum and difference makes reference to the mid and side. So for this, the Tokyo Down Records people say that you have to set them in line. I'm talking to you, Ableton, because you usually make these kind of setups in chains and that doesn't sum up precisely and it doesn't come back precise. So if you want to try, for example, in the drum bus, where you have this loop that you downloaded from Splice, and set it to mid, you can set it to sum because that's mid, and then you copy and paste it, and then you set these to difference, and then you can make some different EQs and different treatment for both things. So let's try and make the most out of this. I'm going to bring the kick back because I'm going to do some compression with it and some expansion. I'm going to tame a little bit of the sides and bring them up and try to make the image a little bit much more clear. And this seems to be working more or less according to me. So this plugin is really complex. It's not only just a great free plugin just because it's free or just because you can use it as a dynamic EQ, because most stock plugins can do pretty much almost anything that this plugin can, but there are certain features that are not available, such as the sticky bands that give you separate dynamic control, the copy and the paste settings, a couple of extra features that are hidden in the options menu, where you can change the drag sensitivity, where you can change the graphics, where you can change the processing, and you can change a couple of other things. I usually use these kind of EQs when I'm teaching because I know that not all of my students can afford a Pro Q or some other kind of expensive plugins. Be sure to try it out, experiment a lot more with it. Maybe you can use this plugin more as a heavy duty producing, sound designing kind of plugin. And maybe if you really already have your mixing go-to plugins, maybe you don't need this so much. It gives you a great solution for loops where you have a huge amount of information, because sometimes you download this drum loop that has a lot of information and you have to access to many things. And trust me, with 4 bands you can do a lot. If you like this kind of videos, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and do all of those things that people on YouTube say. And straight from Mexico City, my name is Juanchis, and thanks for listening.